Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. Today we are reading one of the most loved poems in the English language, To Autumn by John Keats. Written in September 1819, this is often called the most perfect short poem in English poetry. This video is also available for you to check out in Hindi, so please do that as well. In this video we will cover the stanza by stanza explanation, its major themes and about the author section. So let us begin. Stanza 1. The poem opens with autumn described as a season of mists and mellow fruitfulness. Right away, in just the first line, Keats sets the tone for the entire poem. Soft, hazy, and rich. He personifies autumn as a close friend of the sun, and the two of them are described as conspiring together, working as a team to ripen everything within reach. That word, conspiring, is very important. It usually implies something secretive or even sinister, but here Keats uses it playfully to suggest that autumn and the sun are in on a joyful little plot to make the world as abundant as possible. Notice the verbs Keats stacks up across the stanza. Load, bless, bend, fill, swell, plump, budding. This entire stanza is essentially a list of ripening actions, one after another, without pause. Apple trees are bending under the sheer weight of their own fruit. Gourds are swelling to their full size. Hazelnuts are filling out with sweet kernels inside their shells. And astonishingly, flowers are still budding this late in the year. So late that the bees have started to believe summer will simply never end. Keats ends the stanza with one of its most famous images. Bees whose clammy cells have overbrimmed, meaning their honeycombs have literally overflowed with more honey than they can hold. This stanza, taken as a whole, is about abundance, pushed almost to the point of excess. Nothing is decaying yet, nothing is dying. This is autumn at its most generous, its most overwhelming, a season practically drowning in its own richness. It's worth pointing out that Keats never even needs a human character in this stanza. The entire natural world is doing the work, swelling and ripening almost on its own, with autumn and the sun simply directing the process from behind the scenes. Stanza 2. The second stanza shifts completely, both in tone and in technique. Instead of describing the season in the abstract, Keats fully personifies autumn as a woman and asks a rhetorical question: who hasn't seen her out amongst her harvest? This is a classic device in romantic poetry, turning a season into a mythological, almost goddess-like figure. But Keats grounds her in extremely ordinary human labor rather than anything supernatural. He paints four separate pictures of her, almost like four still photographs strung together. In the first, she is sitting carelessly on the floor of a granary, her hair lifted gently by the very wind that used to winnow grain, separating the useful grain from the husks. In the second, she is fallen asleep in a half-reaved field, made drowsy by the scent of poppies growing among the crop, while her sickle lies resting beside her, sparing the next row of flowers from being cut. In the third, she becomes a gleaner, someone who collects leftover grain after the harvest, carefully balancing a full basket on her head as she crosses a stream. And in the fourth and final image, she sits patiently beside a cider press, watching the very last drops of apple juice slowly ooze out hour after hour with no impatience at all. What's remarkable here is how the pace of the poem itself slows down to match its subject. Compare this to the frantic, overflowing energy of the first stanza. Here, everything is still, drowsy, unhurried. Autumn isn't racing to ripen anything anymore. She's tired, she's patient, she's almost falling asleep in the middle of her own work. Time itself seems to be slowing down on the page, mirroring the natural slowing of the season as it moves towards its end. Many critics point to this stanza as the emotional turning point of the poem, the first shift from pure abundance towards something quieter and more reflective. Stanza 3. The final stanza opens with a striking, almost wistful question: where are the songs of spring? Aye, where are they? And then Keats answers his own question immediately, almost correcting himself. Don't think about spring, he says. Autumn has its own music too, just as valid, just as beautiful. What follows is one of the most celebrated soundscapes in all of English poetry. Small gnats moan in a wailful choir among the willow trees by the river, rising and falling in the air depending on whether the wind is strong or faint. Fully grown lambs, no longer babies, but nearly adult sheep, bleat loudly from the hills. Crickets sing from the hedges, a robin in a soft, gentle register, very different from the loud bleating of the lamb, whistles from somewhere in a garden. And finally, swallows, who are gathering together in preparation for their long migration south for the winter, twitter together across the sky. This is, quite literally, the sound of an ending. The gnat's choir is described as wailful, which carries a hint of mourning. The swallows gathering to leave is the clearest possible signal that winter is approaching and that this season, like all seasons, is coming to a close. And yet, Keats refuses to make any of this feel tragic or sad. He frames it simply as autumn's own music, different from spring's, quieter, more layered, but no less rich or worthy of attention. There's no lament here, no desperate clinging to what's passing, just calm, careful observation, right up until the very last line of the poem. So, what is this poem actually about? Underneath all that gorgeous imagery, let's break down a few major threads. First, ripeness and process over any fixed finished product. Notice that the poem is obsessed with the act of ripening, harvesting, and pressing, not with the finished apple sitting in a basket or the empty field once the harvest is done. Every verb in this poem is doing something actively, in the present moment. Keats seems to care far more about the ongoing process of changing itself than about any single fixed state, whether that's the fullness of summer or the emptiness of winter. Acceptance of transience, meaning the quiet acceptance that nothing lasts. Autumn sits directly between summer's abundance and winter's death, and remarkably, Keats never fights against that position. He does not beg autumn to stay a little longer. He does not grieve for summer already gone. He simply observes in incredibly precise sensory detail one season quietly transforming into the next, without panning and without sentimentality. Third, the senses over abstraction. Compared to a lot of other romantic poetry, and even compared to Keats's own earlier odes to autumn, has almost no philosophization, no vision, no supernatural elements, and barely even a first person I anywhere in the poem. It's built almost entirely out of pure image and sound, touch, taste, sight, and hearing, stanza after stanza. Some critics consider this Keats's most objective poem for exactly this reason. The poet disappears, and what's left is the world itself, described with total clarity. Fourth, and perhaps most quietly powerful, mortality. Many scholars read this poem as Keats indirectly confronting his own approaching death. By the time he wrote To Autumn, he was already showing early symptoms of the tuberculosis that would kill him within 2 years. The poem never once mentions death directly. There's no dark imagery, no gloom, but the poem's slow motion, moving from overwhelming fullness to patient harvest, to birds finally gathering and departing for good, mirrors a life gently moving towards its own end. And crucially, it's handled not with fear or despair, but with a kind of calm, graceful dignity that many readers find deeply moving once they know the context behind it. Born in London in 1795, the eldest son of a stable keeper who managed horses for a living, a modest working class background very different from many of his aristocratic literary contemporaries. He trained for years as a surgeon and even qualified to practice, before eventually abandoning medicine altogether to pursue poetry full time, a decision many of his friends thought was genuinely reckless given his lack of money or connections. He published very little during his short life, and the little he did publish was often mocked harshly by critics of the time. One particularly cruel review told him to go back to plasters, pills, and ointment boxes, essentially telling him he should return to medicine and give up on poetry altogether. He died of tuberculosis in Rome in 1821 at just 25 years old, largely believing himself to be a failure who would be forgotten. To Autumn was written during the astonishing year of 1819, sometimes called Keats's Great Year, during which he also wrote Ode to a Nightingale, Ode on a Grecian Urn, Ode on Melancholy, and several other odes now considered among the greatest poems ever written in the English language. He composed To Autumn after taking a walk near the water meadows outside Winchester, and it was quite poignantly one of the very last poems he ever completed before his health declined sharply. In the Romantic era, a literary period roughly spanning 1798 to 1837, which rejected the cold, ordered rationalism of the previous century in favor of raw emotion, the natural world, imagination, and the inner life of the individual. Poets like Wordsworth, Coleridge, Byron, and Shelley were his direct contemporaries, and together actually redefined what English poetry could be. But where many of his fellow romantics reached instinctively for the sublime, towering mountains, violent storms, supernatural visions, and dramatic extremes of feeling, Keats found that exact same emotional intensity in something as ordinary and unremarkable as a quiet September afternoon in the English countryside. That instinct to find profound meaning in the small and the everyday, rather than the grand and the dramatic, is arguably his single greatest and most lasting contribution to English poetry. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way through. I hope that this video helped you, and if you liked it, please like our video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. This video is also available for you to check out in Hindi, so please do that as well.